Hey, everybody. It is the Line Podcast. Mark Carney and Jen Gerson. It is April the 25th, 2025. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to give you each a preview of the columns we're going to be publishing over the next couple of days. We're not doing a Line endorsement, but Jen and I are going to tell you personally under our own names what we think. We'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what those are going to look like. We're going to talk about the state of the race in general. It's almost over. We're not going to make predictions. We're not that reckless, but we'll talk about what we think is happening and why we got here. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening south of the border, both in terms of how it's affecting us, but also what it's telling us about them. All that and more in the latest episode of the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. Well, it's almost over.
Thank God.
I have hated this election. This election has sucked.
Normally elections are very energizing, particularly if you're a politics reporter. Like this is the shit, this is the big show, this is the conclave, this is when we decide what color smoke goes up through the chimney. Yeah. But this was not as fun. I'm more engaged in the conclave politics at this point than I think I am in the Canadian election politics, which is a really bad thing for me because I neither speak Italian nor am in Rome. Would like to be, but I'm not.
If you want to go, you can.
I might. Actually, you know what? I guess we could, couldn't we? I guess I could.
I'm a little tied up for the next couple of weeks, but you could bomb out there. Why not? I will regret using the word bomb, even colloquially, in the context of the papal conclave. To any security officials watching that, I meant that in the sense of a hurried journey.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why I hated this election.
Tell me why you hated this election.
Because the entire lead up of this election was that Canada is under existential threat. That is the essential argument of both the Liberals and the Conservatives. They're making it for different reasons. You know, the Liberals are telling you Donald Trump is coming to gobble us up. The Conservatives are telling you the cost of living crisis has broken the country. Mm-hmm. And then kind of towards the end, and Donald Trump is coming to gobble us up. This was an election that was built, formatted, portrayed, promised in existential terms. I have a question for you. It's a bit of a pop quiz. Can you remember one campaign commitment of either major party?
The capital gains reinvestment tax.
There you go. Okay, that's one. What's your next?
TFSA top-ups.
Anything else?
Using the notwithstanding clause to restore successive sentences for multiple murderers.
You're doing better than I am, because when I thought about this morning, I drew a complete blank.
Well, look, I'm cheating. I literally just finished my last column in which I started to dig into this because one of the big criticisms that that the Conservatives keep on throwing at people like us is, we have policy, you're just not paying attention to all of our great policy. So I went and I paid attention to all of their great policy. And there's some good policy.
A little.
But is there any of it that meets the level of the transformational change? Is there any of it that stands up to the existential threat that they're suggesting needs to be addressed if the Liberals are reelected? No. And I mean, we discussed this a little bit in the last podcast. Essentially, what we've seen policy-wise from the Conservatives are policies that would have been totally in place in the final years of the Harper era, when the Conservatives have basically run through all their big ideas. and we're therefore throwing out all of these small ball, boutique tax credits at us.
I don't give the Liberals much more credit, though.
Oh God, no! They're. If anything, theirs was worse.
I can't remember any significant policy announcements they've made, and all of this against the backdrop of both parties agreeing that the country is in danger. They disagree somewhat about why, but we are told, an election in which we will choose how to defend ourselves against existential threats, either to our prosperity or perhaps to our national survival. High-speed rail program review, because it's not even like building the rail, it's figuring out what the route will go. And as you said, TSFA top-ups.
Plastic straws.
Plastic straws, yeah. Well, we shall sheath them on our bayonets.
On the liberal side, we had a plan to create some kind of private public housing thing that will create cheap housing using prefabricated homes in cheap land somehow. A GST tax credit cut, a GST tax cuts on new homes.
Yep, that is how we defend this country from the airborne.
But
and I think
Arctic investments in order to improve Arctic defense, that's not bad.
There were a few of those.
Yeah.
I think one of the fascinating things in recent years is, obviously, countries aren't people, and we can't whatever the word is.
Anthropomorphize.
See, you were so you came in confident there. You're like, I'm going to show Matt how that's done, and immediately gagged.
Nope.
Anthropomorphize.
Anthropomorphize.
Whatever. You can't treat things that aren't animals like humans are animals. But I've been waiting for years to see the rise of a Canadian immune system response to the
everything,
danger.
all the things.
Yeah, to all the things. Maybe in 20 years, a new generation of politicians will come up who've actually grown up. They're veterans of the housing crisis and inflation and, the border wars and
elbows up, Matt. Elbows up.
Elbows up. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe Mike Myers will save us.
I actually think, with all due respect to Mike Myers, I got nothing against him. I actually think he hurt us. I'm increasingly convinced that one of the bad things that happened to us in the last few months is that our amorphous anxiety that was sort of causing us to think of weird things to do, how to respond to this, because we didn't know where to put it. He gave us a slogan and merchandise. And all of a sudden, instead of slacktivism. Yeah. And instead of waking up every day going, holy shit, the barbarians are coming. What are we going to do about it? Well, we know what we're going to do about it. Elbows up.
Elbows up. It's boomer slacktivism too. It's the equivalent of Coney 2012, but for boomer Canadians. Yeah, that's what that was.
Well, I don't know if you remember how Coney 2012 ended for the Coney 2012 guy, but I hope we do better.
I do. I did use that reference quite consciously, but no, it's slacktivism.
Google it, folks. It didn't go well for the Coney 2012 guy.
I would also draw an interesting analogy here, because one thing that happened during the beginning era of COVID, and I realized...
Stop Coney. If we're going to tell people to Google stop Coney.
Stop Coney. I apologize. Okay, Google it. Look, one other thing that I would point out, in the early era of when COVID started to be a problem, okay? And I know nobody wants to talk about COVID, but one thing that really astonished me was that we had the rhetoric coming out of government and public health basically saying, this is a huge deal. This is like World War II. This is our generation's Waterloo here. And then the answer to that was stay home and make bread and watch Netflix. And like the degree of the hype of the rhetoric wasn't matched by a request for action. And that made people feel helpless, paranoid, alone, isolated. It didn't actually galvanize the social cohesion that was required to address the threat. And I made that note pretty early on. I think in a Maclean's article in the early days of COVID. I remember this. And
you wrote one for us as well, though, very early on, where you said that there was that the rhetoric of national danger and threat ramped up, but there was no corresponding surge in an outlet where to put that, like
Yes.
nursing or making masks or volunteerism
Make
of any
masks,
kind.
volunteer, make
Yeah.
soup for your local hospital nurses. Like
Yeah.
you need, if you're going to ramp up that kind of national rhetoric, you need to give people a call to action, a place to something to do about it. Like, and
Yeah.
the call to action has to be more than just vote. In that case, it's like we're dealing with an existential threat. Okay, do you need us to go to the gun range? I mean, do we need to learn? Do we need to get our gun licenses? Like, because if that's what we need to do, then let's do that, and let's give people some kind of something tangible they can do to make them feel like they're helping.
No,
But
just elbows up.
no, but just getting people scared and paranoid about this or that hypothetical possibility, but then at the same time giving them no material outlet for that paranoia and that anxiety, it creates this really unhealthy feedback loop psychologically. And also it undermines trust and credibility in the people making the rhetorical statements. So yeah, I think it's a problem. I don't know. Do you want to get into the question about whether or not the Liberals overhyped Trump as a threat in order to wedge the electorate? I think it's an interesting question.
On a very meta level, I don't want to get into any of these questions because I find it very sad.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, sure, we can talk about that a bit. I was downtown this week at a lunch event about the election. It was off the record, so I'm not going to reveal anything anyone said, but I will reveal something I said because hey, you can't burn me on that. One of the things that was absolutely fascinating in this election, and I don't think it's collusion. I don't think the parties have any sort of unholy agreement on this, but I think every once in a while there's sort of a truce of mutual necessity where there are issues that we as a people, 41 million of us, should be talking about. And Jen's raised some of them in the opening minutes of this podcast: defense, security, infrastructure, burden sharing in a country undergoing rapid threat intensification. We really should be having all these conversations. But there's almost, and again, I'm not suggesting actual deliberate collusion, but it's like there's an understood gentleman's agreement among the party leaders that we're not going to talk about that because that would be awkward. Because like if Mark Carney or if Pierre Poilievre or God help him, Jagmeet Singh actually needs to start talking about like actually fortifying this country, like we talked a little bit about whether or not we would like ram a pipeline through Quebec territory to get it to Atlantic Tidewater.
And the answer was no.
But it was like an uncomfortable, vague no.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like all of them understand. And again, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a truce of mutual necessity or mutual self-interest. Mark Carney doesn't want to get into the details of what he would do to make Canada a stronger country. Neither does Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
And there's
they just want people to sign off, and then they'll get to whatever they think they need to get to.
The history of almost 2 decades covering this. Let me tell you what the history of defense politics in this country is. The Liberals say they will do better, faster, and the Conservatives say they will do even more than that, even faster. But no one really has like a specific thing they want to do. All right, well, we'll build an Arctic base. We'll commit to this plane or that plane. But this is just filler. Arguing, like filling your campaign brochure with like pictures of fighter jets or destroyers or something. Hey, it's like, it's good clip art and stuff like that. But there's no overarching, or even maybe kind of flip this around, flip the directionality, anchoring discussion of Canadian public interest in defense. What are our national interests? How do we leverage our advantages? How do we compensate for our disadvantages? How do we protect ourselves militarily, economically, socially, culturally, politically, financially? No one wants to talk about this. We just don't. Never happens.
The analogy that I come up with, it's not defense, it's grocery bills. All the parties recognize there's cost of living issues. All the parties recognize that there are significant issues with around food prices and food pricing going up. And there is a very simple thing the federal government absolutely could do tomorrow to decrease grocery prices for every Canadian in this country. Lowest hanging fruit possible. Supply management. Abolish supply management. It is the easiest, simplest, most obvious thing you can do to reduce grocery prices, the least distortionate, the thing that will actually also help us rebuild trade alliances, not just with America, but with other countries as well. It's a terrible policy. There are ways that we can compensate farmers for the lost value of their quota. It will make Canadians radically more competitive, more innovative, reduce grocery prices. It is a win-win-win-win-win across the board. Supply management. The Conservatives hate it. Not a single one of them will touch it because it's politically hard. So you can't simultaneously present the cost of living issues, especially around food pricing, in existential terms if you're not willing to get rid of the easiest policy or do the easiest possible thing to actually address that problem. And then expect me to take you seriously. I don't.
Let's flip the script a little bit here, because I'm going to
Okay.
do a Vulcan mind meld of your idea and my idea.
Sure. Okay.
Or
Eggs
let's
and defense. Let's do it. Let's figure out how we
let's
manage
talk
it.
about defense through eggs. Let's
Okay.
actually talk about whether or not Canada should have a national program. And I know national programs in Canada get a bad rap, but should we be pursuing a policy of food security? Should that
Sure,
be
okay.
one of our national policy objectives as part of like either asshole Canada or hardening Canada, whatever we want to call it? Personally, I think it's probably a terrible idea, but we could talk about it.
Well, and
But we
I would say the only good argument for supply management is a food security argument.
But no one makes it. Because
nobody-
Pierre
nobody
Poilievre
really
and Mark
makes
Carney, they don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah, well, that's they don't want to risk pissing off a couple of rural farmers in Quebec.
Well, that's what the conversation is. It's family farms. We will stand up for family farms.
Most of these aren't even family farms anymore, but that's fine. I mean,
There's a
bullshit.
term you
It's
and
just
I have.
bullshit.
Yeah, there's a term you and I have kicked around a little bit, and bullshit fits. But the other term we've been kicking around is Potemkin election,
Yeah.
where we have debates that aren't really debates. Why? Well, because when you have an election, you have a debate. So like we rent a room, we fly Steve Paikin out, God bless him, and we put these guys under the TV lights, and they get 35 seconds to answer questions that should fill volumes of policy documents, and we declare the debate held, and we have politicians who show up and talk about family farms, and they tick the "we talked about food security" box and put on a hard hat and go hang out with mining workers. So, okay, that's our resource policy box ticked. They're all going through the motions. And, elbows up, and we're under existential threat, and what are we going to do about it?
But this
Nothing.
is also why there's an increasing disconnect between the electorate and the people we're electing. And it's why there's increasing frustration between these two people. Because on one hand, you're making these big rhetorical claims about existential threats, but you're not matching that rhetoric with the willingness to do anything politically hard, or to make sacrifices, or to expend capital. Political capital, I mean real capital, yes, but political capital, no. You're not willing to do anything that will make you unpopular. You're not willing to piss the wrong people off. We need to ram pipelines through at a pace we didn't think possible. This is not even. We have to change the way we're doing things. Oh, but would you force Quebec to accept a pipeline? No.
Oh,
No.
no. Purely to blow people's minds. Let's actually, just to make this point, let's say we decided we needed to raise $50 billion a year.
Okay.
To spend on the military or infrastructure or whatever. We could raise that money. We could raise the GST. We could raise income taxes. We could raise corporate taxes. We could cut tens of billions out of existing planned expenditures and divert that money onto new things here. I'm not advocating any of these policies. I'm just saying, if you told the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, again, God bless them, that they had to come up with $50 billion in new annual spending, they would each have ways of doing that are more in line with their kind of core ideology and provisions, right? But no one even mentioned it. What we'll hear every once in a while is the NDP is like, well, we should raise taxes on this, or we should, ding billionaires or something, or the Conservatives will say, we're going to pass a bring it home tax cut and grow the economy. It's just, they all have their own versions of how they would do this.
They all have their own versions of fantasy math now. They're all so disconnected from reality that it's not even worth parsing.
And they're never going to do it.
No, because that's politically hard. Nobody wants to do things that are hard, Matt. Oh, who's up?
You, so what's your column? And don't spoil it
Okay. Well,
entirely, but we're going to be publishing it soon.
the other thing I'm gonna say is the thing that didn't come up during this election, which pissed me off. Although I didn't force the issue, my own sort of schedule was really weird this election, and I wasn't able to cover it as closely as I actually wanted to. Thanks, Carney, for timing the election around spring break and my husband's travel schedule. I take it personally, but C18, C11, C63. People who've been following me at the line know that I've written about these bills extensively. C18 is the bill that keeps your news off of Facebook, not the Liberals' own paid-for advertising off Facebook, mind you, just us. C18 is the legislation, the Liberal legislation that has actually amplified disinformation and misinformation because anything that's regarded as credible news can't get on Facebook. And that has had compounding algorithmic effects on independent news outlets and legacy news outlets alike. C11, CBC mandate, the Broadcasting Act, Bill C63, the Online Harms Act, which again I've written about extensively, and the potential legitimate threats to free speech that presents. Hasn't even come up. Hasn't even come up. I haven't heard either the Conservatives or the Liberals talk about being willing to repeal, alter, change those bills at all. Just plastic straws. I don't know.
Jail, not bail.
Jail, not bail. Build the homes, man. Axe the tax.
Verb the noun.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, folks, this is an existential threat election.
But it's an existential threat election. If we have 4 more years of liberal government, everything will fall to shit, and or Trump is trying to eat us. Take your pick.
Oh yeah, Donald? Well, we have a study group picking the route for the Montreal to Toronto HSR.
That'll show them.
Mm-hmm.
That'll show them.
Which probably is really only economically viable if we plug it into the planned Amtrak high-speed expansions in the Northeast. Yeah, so the column I'm planning to write, and it's not written yet. It's kind of like it's brain written, but not like typed written, is what I think that the key issue of this election is. And I don't mean in terms of what the key election of this issue, words are hard. I don't mean what the key issue of the election should have been. Nailed it. I mean what it actually has become. This election, and for listeners out there who are broken the same way I am, yes, this is a TNG reference. This election is the measure of a man. This is Mark Carney's election. Mark Carney's case for himself, and I would say the conservative case against him, is that Mark Carney either will or won't represent epic change. Where Mark Carney, and it's been mostly implicit, but sometimes it's been explicit. His pitch to the Canadian voters is that Justin Trudeau couldn't, but I will. And the conservative pitch, essentially, to voters is Justin couldn't, he won't either. But it all comes down, fundamentally, to your assessment of Mark Carney, which is insane. A guy that Canadians have only really seen in action as a politician for 5 weeks has become the issue here. And what I think is remarkable about this is how Mark Carney's argument, if we accept it, is actually an extraordinary indictment of his party, right? Because in order for Mark Carney's argument to make sense, and he has said this explicitly a few times. Someone asked him, and I remember, I'll have to Google it, or maybe one of the listeners can drop it into the comments and do my homework for me. But at one point in the campaign, Mark Carney was asked, this has been promised before. Why should we believe you when you're promising it again? And he said, hey, it hasn't been promised before. This is the first time I've promised it. And that makes it a new promise. And he got mocked for that, but I actually thought that was an almost perfect, accurate distillation of what his pitch is. Ignore the last 10 years. I'm a fresh start. And if we accept that, we have to accept also that it would have been possible for Justin Trudeau to do better, either as a man or as a politician. And if we accept that, we have to then accept that the Liberal Party let a complete and utter dud failure occupy the Prime Minister's office for 5 extremely chaotic, turbulent, and dangerous years. The only way to buy the Mark Carney argument for his own election is to buy the fact that Canada was led by maybe a well-meaning, but an epic failure for 5 years, and that everyone in the Liberal Party around him was okay with that. That if only someone like Mark Carney had come along, that we would have fixed the problems. That all these bad things that Mark Carney says he's going to make better would be better by now. And in order to buy into the awesomeness of Mark Carney, we also have to buy into the complicity and just utter epic uselessness of all of the people around him. And I don't know how am I, just as a voter, supposed to make sense of that? I am not a believer in the great man thesis of politics. The great man thesis of history, maybe. We can talk about that in another podcast. But in general, I don't think Justin Trudeau was particularly incompetent or ill-willed. I think he got captured by a machine that's broken. And Mark Carney is trying to tell us that by the sheer
machine.
Yeah, by the sheer power of his Mark Carney awesomeness, that he is going to overcome that. And in order for us to believe that, we have to believe that it would have been possible for Justin Trudeau to have done it, and that he just never quite got around to it. I am massively unimpressed by the Conservatives. I am massively unenthused about Pierre Poilievre. But I don't see how Mark Carney can make the argument that he is a change agent. I just don't, it doesn't make sense. His argument for being the agent of change is internally inconsistent. He is asking us to believe that he is either A, supernatural, or B, captain of a team that could have done better and just never quite got around to it. I don't believe in ghosts. And I don't believe option B is a good pitch to the Canadian people. So I don't know where the fuck that leaves us. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I think that you made a very compelling case against the Liberals. I'm going to follow on that argument, but I think first we should put a like and subscribe, little pin there, and then you can come back and you can sort of, I will discuss my final column for the election, and I think it complements yours exceptionally well. So, on that note, like and subscribe. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca. And remember that we are actually much more articulate in print than we are in podcast, or at least I am. Matt is actually really good. But you should check us out.
Don't anthropomorphize us.
Yeah, there you go. But I think that if you enjoy listening to our podcast, you will actually enjoy reading our stuff much more, because our written stuff it's better. So
we run it through the editing box a couple of times.
Exactly. So anyway, check us out, like and subscribe, and then I will start ranting. I will start offering my TED Talk, my rant.
In moments. This episode of the Line Podcast is also brought to you by TikTok Canada. Canada's Foreign Interference Commission made clear that bad actors are trying to use online platforms to interfere in our democracy. No platform is immune from this threat, and this is why TikTok Canada is focused on securing its platform during the federal election. An important part of this work is TikTok's local Canadian team, who have been working with regulators like Elections Canada to provide Canadian TikTok users with verified information about the voting process, engaging with groups like the Samara Centre for Democracy and the Democratic Engagement Exchange, and consulting with experts across Canada to get their recommendations and feedback on our election plan. Election integrity is a global priority for TikTok, and this highly localized approach happens because of TikTok's Canadian employees who understand our culture, languages, and political system. Having these local employees here is clearly in Canada's interest. However, TikTok Canada has been ordered to shut down its local operations and to lay off these employees. It doesn't make sense. The next government has an opportunity to find a solution in Canada that protects well-paying jobs and billions in economic investment, while addressing security concerns and fostering a thriving tech sector. Let's find a solution for TikTok that makes sense for Canadians. Well, I just finished my TED Talk. In this segment, Jen is going to make her final pitch to the voters. And then probably, Jen, do you want to take a couple of minutes at the end and just talk about overall impressions of the race, kind of where we think
I think
things
so.
are?
And we should talk a little bit about polls and things like that.
Sure.
But
So you go
Matt,
first. What's your column coming up?
So Matt, I think you've laid out the case against the Liberals very effectively. And I don't want to reiterate any of that because I think you did a good job there. And it more or less aligns with my own opinion on this. You're welcome. I don't want to try to be condescending. I'm just saying.
No, and me neither. I'm just not good at expressing gratitude within normal human social.
Oh, that's fair. Okay. All right. Never mind. But you want to know my sort of three-word takeaway from this election was?
Verb the noun?
No. Stillborn generational turnover.
That's really bleak. Yeah. That, like, the mental image that immediately brought to mind was depressing, but also a little gross.
This really should have been the election where Canada's locus of power
shifted a generation.
Moved from the boomers to the Gen Xers and the millennials. And that turnover died in the womb and was never born.
See, you're doing it again. That's still gross.
I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't harp on that particular image too much during the column, so, you know.
Paragraphs 7 through 14 are all about the political placenta of Canada.
I tried to keep it to, like, seed and growth metaphors, but there you go. And I think one of the reasons why that was, I mean, you've talked about the Liberals and their failures, and we've been quite extensive about this. But, like, look, power can't actually grow unless you're planted in the soil of responsibility. There, a less gross metaphor for you. And if there's one thing that I think that that the Conservatives have failed to demonstrate, it's not that they can't be appealing, it's that they can't necessarily be responsible. Right? That's, I think, where they fell short here. And one of the things that I think I'm already hearing from movement conservatives, is a rehashing of their persecution complex. I'm not going to go into the persecution complex stuff again. You and I have ranted about this at length already. But essentially, the Conservatives operate in a psychological headspace that believes that the entire system's out to get them. And so therefore they don't engage with that system. The system rejects them, and then the system's out to get them. Everything about their persecution complex and their victimhood complex becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you want to see a more specific example of this in action, I think one of the biggest strategic mistakes that the Conservatives made during this campaign was alienating the legacy media and running against the mainstream media. And one of the reasons why I think that was a mistake, I know why it was born, I know where it came from. It came from the Conservative sort of habitual feeling that the media is out to get them and is never going to give them a fair shot. And so therefore we'll just run against them, we'll ignore them, and we'll focus our attentions on partisan media or activist media or the www.wef globalists are out to get us chick. Those are the people we're going to talk to. The problem with that is that Pierre Poilievre, if you look at some of the stats on his relative likability, he actually isn't unlikable. He's actually, especially among a certain cohort of persuadable voters and conservatives, an actually very likable individual. And do you know when he does really, really well? Pierre Poilievre does really, really well in long-form interviews.
And when he doesn't act like an android.
And when he doesn't act like an android. When he sits down for like an hour, 2 hours, like with people, and actually talks about the issues and what he cares about, his passion comes through. And his sincerity comes through, and his authenticity comes through in those types of formats. When he did long-form interviews, he was great. The problem is that he only ever did long-form interviews with people who were already converted. He was too chicken shit to even come on the line. He was too chicken shit to do a long-form interview, I think, with The Hub. He only did long-form interviews with people who were deep, deep in conservative land, with people who were sort of a part of niche outlets who never really challenged him. He did the long-form interviews with the softballs. And in doing so, he totally failed to show the best side of himself to the people who were maybe outside the tent or maybe just on the edges of the tent. He couldn't reach the persuadables. And he did that because of the Conservatives' long-held, ingrained persecution complex. That was a direct result of that choice. That was a strategic choice that they made as a result of their victimhood mentality, for lack of a better term. And it was just a lost opportunity. It was a bad strategic choice, and it led to a lost opportunity, and it led to Pierre being very successful at doubling down on his own basis support, but just not being able to show the sincerity of his efforts outside of that space. It was a bad strategic decision that the campaign consciously made. And rather than the campaign own that and say, you know what, our media strategy was not effective here, it did not do what we were hoping it was going to do. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to do the same thing they've been doing for the last 15 years. Media's out to get us. We're the victims. We can't possibly get a fair hearing. They didn't even try to get a fair hearing. They didn't even try. You know, and I could use another couple of examples like that. I lay it out in my column, sort of piece by piece by piece. But there was strategic mistake after strategic mistake after strategic mistake, and not just the failure to pivot away from Trump. I mean, there were major, major strategic mistakes that the Conservatives made that indicated clearly that this was not a party that was ready to be grown-ups. This was not a party that was ready to assume that generational turnover. This was not a party that was ready to accept responsibility. And the more they double down on their persecution and the victimhood complex, the more they emphasize to me that this is a party that is allergic to responsibility for the consequences of their own actions. Unwilling to accept dissent, unwilling to accept a change of course, unwilling to hear alternative points of view out. Which means they're just as bad as the Liberals. That's the problem. That means they're just as bad or worse, right? They're literally repeating all the worst mistakes of the Liberal government. And they're not even in power yet, so there's not even an excuse. So that's, to me, the depressing thing about this election. I mean, my final line in the column, and I'll spoil it for people who want to read it. It's a good final line, I think. But it came to me a couple days ago, and that is, you know what? I want the Liberals to go away, and I want the Conservatives to grow up. And I'm resigned to the fact that I'm going to get neither.
I can't argue with that. Something that annoys me is admitting when people I normally disagree with are right about stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's awful. Let's be honest.
The worst. I was thinking, it's funny. You and I really are intellectually quite aligned.
It's kind of like a good thing for this podcast, but it also is a bad thing because we never really debate. We just sort of shoot the shit.
I would not have expressed it the way you did, but I've had a similar kind of almost gut level feeling. And this is why I was thinking about annoying people who I normally disagree with being right about something. I was thinking a few days ago during the week about how in the 1990s, when kind of Rush Limbaugh style talk radio was booming in the United States, never really made the jump to Canada in the same way, because I think Canadians are just culturally different. But when it was becoming incredibly powerful, and then as a cultural force, and then economic forces in the United States as well, were leading to a real consolidation of the locally owned radio stations. So what you would end up having is boosters all across the United States, all throughout the territory, but they were carrying nationally syndicated content. And then later on, you had cultural criticisms of the Fox News rage machine. And then in recent years, I saw for the first time an insult that made me laugh. To our friends at Meta, no offense, guys, but one of the things that just cracked me up was that it was used as an insult by like a Gen Zer. This person sounds like they spend too much time on Facebook. And why that was funny is because I immediately understood what they meant. I think people as early as the 1990s, mostly American liberals, you probably would have been reading this in places like the New York Times or the New Yorker or Rolling Stone. They were writing warnings about what this was going to do to our society. And I don't think it's a uniquely conservative problem, because I think our liberals in particular have vanished up their own bumholes as well. Yes. Being high on your own supply is an epidemic in North American politics right now, and I think it might ultimately prove a pretty friggin' fatal one. But when it comes to the Conservatives, this is very McLuhan-esque, right? But at a certain point, the medium and the message has just become indistinguishable to me, where the conservative movement writ large, and I don't mean the Canadian one, I mean on a global sense, all looks and sounds the same. And I was talking with some friends earlier this week, just a personal private conversation. So I won't name names or anything, but one of my friends was really objecting to the notion that Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump are similar. And I actually fundamentally agree that that's wrong. I don't think Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump are similar at all, but they sound the same.
Yeah.
And they sound the same. And this is where I think Canadian liberals are either wrong or pretending to be wrong, and they're just using it strategically. The reason Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump sound the same isn't because Poilievre has any particular affinity for Donald Trump. It's because most Western conservative leaders right now sound the same. Because it's a style and a tone of communication that goes through political communication channels that are largely standardized. You know, a political campaign in the United Kingdom or France or Germany or Italy or Australia or Canada, the United States largely looks the same because it's a pretty small group of consultants that do them, and they're all using the same mix of legacy and social media tools. And I don't know if our conservatives, and this is where I'm going from the global critique down to the more local one, this has broken brains. Like, we have trained people to operate in such incredibly narrow, controlled ecosystems that you were saying a few minutes ago, as one of your criticisms of the campaign was that it wasn't just that they failed to pivot on Trump. This iteration of the Conservative Party has a really hard time adapting to anything. And I think they've had the opportunity to play in a sandbox they do control. Selected interviewers on controllable social media channels, reaching a pre-selected, motivated audience. That they're optimized for that and not for responding to the unexpected on terrain you're not familiar with to reach the unconverted. And again, in the interest of fairness and to my conservative friends who will object to this, I'm not telling you the liberals are any different. What I am telling you is that the conservatives have increasingly turned into the liberals, not necessarily on policy, on tone, but the liberals are also optimized to fight through very niche channels, to niche battlegrounds, to reach niche voters. And to Jen's thesis, it's the boomers. The conservatives have become mirror images of the liberals, except the liberals have voter efficiency on their side, and there's not much the conservatives can do about it. They have to beat them on the field of political battle. Instead, they're matching them. And the popular vote, which said we talk about the polls, they're converging. I've been saying for weeks that I think Mark Carney is a sugar high. I think his numbers are coming back down to earth, and the conservative numbers are rising.
But the conservatives need to be about 3 to 4 points ahead of the liberals in the popular vote to make up for the vote inefficiency problem.
That's the thing.
Means they don't have the luxury.
Is a loss.
So they don't have the luxury of matching the liberals
on
their communication strategies. They've got to beat them.
And I do find the polls interesting because one comment about your column and then one comment about the polls, and they're both about the polls. You talk about the stillborn generational transfer, which again is still icky. But I do, it's a very vivid mental image, but I get it. Let us just say one of the wild cards in this election could be a surprisingly good conservative outcome if one condition is met, if the young actually show up. And this is Lucy in the football.
That's been the campaign strategy that the NDP have been leaning on for generations now.
I know.
The young will show up for us any day now. I mean,
any day now. Lucy football.
The thing that I want to scream at to young people, and whether or not those young people are NDP or conservative, is irrelevant to me at this point.
Weirdly, they are probably listening to the podcast though.
Well,
this is their environment.
But I think that young people have absorbed a degree of apathy and cynicism about politics that they haven't deserved or earned. But like none. That's just laughing.
Okay, my microphone is muted, so you couldn't hear me laughing. But no, I don't know if I resent or resemble that remark. But no, look.
I don't think you and I are young anymore, though, Matt. Like I think we've earned our cynicism.
Oh, we're young compared to the boomers, though.
Well, that's true. But, I mean, look.
We're the middle generation.
The world belongs to the people who show up. You don't show up?
How Jed Bartlett of you, which is a reference the Jed Zers won't get.
Yeah, well, but I mean, look, I mean, this is the problem, is that the young don't show up. So they're ruled by their elders. And they're ruled increasingly by elders who are more interested in shoring up their own entitlements and benefits at the young's expense. So if you feel like the system's rigged against you, well, it is. You
So
don't
what are you
show
going to do
up.
about it?
So what are you going to do about it?
In his column for us this week, Gregory Jack, who's one of our friends at Ipsos, who and by the way, Ipsos has been a great partner for the line this election, so we're really grateful to them, and we've got a few more things with them planned. He made this point I thought was fantastic, and I've already stolen it for my own use. Borrowed it, Greg. I borrowed it. I think the point he made in his column I thought was bang on, and it's exactly what Jen is talking about here, is that everybody votes in a very fundamental way. Everybody votes for their own future self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
It is very, like, it would be pretty friggin' heroic for someone to go out and vote against their self-interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know people often lecture other voters and go, why are they voting against their self-interest? They're not. They just perceive their interest differently. No one votes suicidally. Everybody thinks they're voting for something that has improved their lot in life. But I think is what Greg pointed out. We're just going to use round numbers here. If you're 65, if you're 45, and if you're 25, your future is not a static constant. The boomers, and as he wrote in his column, they need stability so that they can enjoy the retirements they feel they have earned. People, Jen and I are both in our early 40s, but like our closest round number on this one is the 45s. We need stability combined with economic dynamism because these are our prime earning years. This is when we, speaking generationally, are going to make a ton of money and hopefully build up something to leave to our children.
Yep.
The 25-year-olds,
they need to blow things up.
They need to blow the shit out of some stuff.
Yep.
And I don't know. And I just find that fascinating, right? Because I mentioned to you before, like a comment about your column, but also about the polls here. One of the concerns I have, and this is the segment of the podcast we set aside for meta observations about the election. Let me lay out a scenario for you. And I don't mean this as a prediction, but let me just lay out a plausible scenario, okay?
Okay.
3 months ago, the Conservatives were at about 45 and the Liberals were in the low 20s, right?
Right.
Justin Trudeau leaves. Mark Carney, there's a leadership race. Mark Carney comes in, and simultaneously to that, Donald Trump starts doing the 51st state annexation stuff. And our politics gets completely scrambled. Conservatives drop sharply. Liberals come way back. The Liberals come back higher than the Conservative drop can explain because the NDP vote is cratered to wildly historic lows.
And as an aside, that's going to be the secondary excuse that Conservatives use to
100%.
justify their outcome. It wasn't us. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't
the
lose any
NDP
voters.
tanked.
The NDP tanked. That's also bullshit. But okay,
kind
moving
of.
on.
I think,
Well, it is and it isn't. We can get into the polls if you want, but
I think we will in a minute. But if you look at the trend lines for the last 3 months, what jumps out at you first is the collapse of the Conservatives. What jumps out at you next is the collapse of the NDP. If you have any intellectual power left to look, what you notice next is that the Liberals are trending down pretty steadily.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm wondering here, and this could be a hats off, like a hat tip to the Liberal campaign here for having called the timing correctly. In recent weeks, the Conservatives are gaining on the Liberals. And Jen and I have already said that a tie is a loss for the Conservatives just because the electoral map here. But let's talk socially. Imagine our society in 3 months, or maybe after the summer, so kind of around Labor Day, where the shine has come off Mark Carney. The Conservatives are back on top in the polls, but the Liberals stuck the landing and the NDP collapsed so badly that Mark Carney gets in with a 2-seat majority. I don't know that's good for the country. Now, majority governments are stable. I like them from that perspective. But what the fuck is going to happen to us on like a societal scale, emotional well-being, if by Labor Day, the Conservatives are clearly ahead in the polls again, but the Liberals got 3.8 years of runway?
do you want to know a better nightmare scenario, a worse nightmare scenario?
Oh, please.
If we're talking about nightmare,
Yes, by all means.
It's a conservative minority government, but they can't control a majority of the House. So even though they have more seats, it goes to a Liberal bloc coalition?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say one better, but I'm going to
Okay.
give you a
Well,
permutation of that.
sure.
I've talked to senior Liberals and Conservatives this week, and they agree on something, that the Liberals are within striking distance of the majority, but they don't have it locked up. And if they're on the high side of the margin of error, they're going to get it. If they're on the low side, they're not. But with the NDP in the shape they're in, we could find ourselves in a situation, just hypothetically speaking, if the Liberals are 10 seats short of a majority and the NDP's only got 8 seats, there might not be any natural coalition partners. Now, you've mentioned the Bloc already. The Bloc can always be the kind of the partner of last resort. But again, I ask you, what's that going to do for the country?
What does that bloc do for? Yeah, well, that's kind of the problem here, especially if you're talking about Western alienation and those sorts of flare-ups of issues, right?
The young voters could just show up for once and solve this problem.
You think? You think? Maybe if you're under the age of 40, you might want to get your ass in gear. I don't know. Look, I want to talk about the polls. Do you want to put a break here and come back to discuss the polls?
We'll just make this the general election chat here.
I mean, so there have been a lot of chatter about the polls are coming back, the polls are tightening, the polls are widening, the polls are blah, 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 blah. So first, I'm going to start this with my universal conversation about polling. As a political reporter, I don't follow the day-to-day tracking on polling because I don't give a shit. And I think that if you're a good political reporter, you avoid the temptation of horse race reporting. There are people out there who do the horse race stuff. They do it really well. Fournier is one of them. Ipsos is one of them. There's lots of internal back and forth on like what the daily tracking numbers are showing. But those are for math nerds. And polls, even the best, most properly conducted polls, are not predictions. They're just not. They're snapshots of where the electorate is at any given moment in time. And I think there's a tendency to mistake a polling number with a prediction, and it's dumb. Nobody can predict the future. That's just not what it can do. It can give you probabilistic outcomes based on where people were at the moment they were asked.
A tie in the polls is not a prediction of shared joint power.
No, that's exactly it. Especially gets more complicated in Canada. Almost nobody, I think nobody does riding level poll analysis. So what we're doing typically is we're taking overall popular vote numbers and we're trying to track them to particular ridings. But, higher vote shares in one area, lower vote shares in another area, that can have dramatic effects. Movements of only 2 or 3% at the riding level can have dramatic effects on the final seat count, right? So it's a very imprecise game. And I don't think people should pay much attention to it. Polls are really, really effective for parties. Polls are very, very useful for people who are trying to craft specific messages. Polls are really, really useful for people who are trying to allocate resources. So if you know that one riding is in trouble, you might move some extra volunteers, bodies, or money from a healthy riding to a not healthy riding. If you know, for example, that messaging, you think this messaging is going to hit, you want to be tracking your response to that messaging in real time so that you're not spending lots of money on ads that aren't hitting. Like, you know what I mean? Like, polls are really useful to help people basically manage internal resources. They're not really useful for people who are trying to track an election. They're not actually that useful for people who are trying to predict an outcome. They're not actually that useful for political reporters, right? Our focus is and should be on other things. So polling's interesting. I pay attention to it. I don't totally ignore it because I think it's useful to get a sense of where a narrative is at or where people's heads are at, generally speaking. But I'm not following a 1 or 2 point, 5.7 point increase in Ipsos versus Nanos versus Main Street versus Innovative or anything. I think that trying to engage in that is a bit of a fool's errand and it bores me. I'm not that interested. Polls aren't the interesting part of politics. They're just an indicator, just like fundraising numbers are an indicator, right?
Or crowd sizes.
Yeah, or crowd sizes, exactly. Like, is it interesting? Do I note it? Is it one of the data points that goes in the back of my head when I'm examining something? Yeah. But is it the be-all, end-all? Nah, not really. Language, messaging, movement, narrative. These are things that are actually much more interesting to me. Now, maybe that's because I'm a nerdy writer. So, look, I don't think that you should. And you know who I think polls are really not useful for? Polls are really not useful for voters. You should not be putting your ballot or marking your X according to what a poll says. You simply shouldn't be. That's terrible strategy. It's terrible advice. You should be voting for the person whom you want to represent you at the riding level in particular. That's what you should be focusing on. You should be looking at the parties, looking at who represents your values, who aligns with your values, and who's doing the thing that you want that you want the leader of the country to be doing, and you should be putting your vote for that person. You should not be tracking polls as a voter. There's no point in doing that at all. Complete waste of time. That's my universal sort of rant about polling and its usefulness or its not usefulness. But I don't know, Matt, if you have anything to add to that. I mean,
I like polls more than you do.
Yeah. Well, they have the beautiful valence of objectivity, right? Which makes them very alluring.
I'm not that naive. No, I like polls for a couple of reasons, but I mean, I agree with your cautions on them. I don't consume any poll in isolation. I look at 7 and 10-day trends, and that has the disadvantage of being backward looking, and I get that. But it also has the advantage of errors get washed out, because even good pollsters have bad batches, and pollsters will tell you that. And I often actually think the criticisms I'm making here of pollsters, I don't think are going to piss pollsters off. I think they're going to be received with relief, because it's like, oh, thank God, like Gurney has listened to us when we tell him what our limits are. But I think polls are useful, interesting, and reliable if you use them correctly. But what I also think is that we are in an era right now where social changes, and I confess to a degree of personal life change, has made me more and more dependent on polls because I trust my anecdotal indicators less and less. Where I don't think being where I am in my life right now, and I don't mean this in a bad way, like I'm not trying to be ominous, but like my life right now is consumed mostly by my kids, which means a lot of my social interactions are in the context of parenting, which means my social group is overwhelmingly representative of one Toronto elementary school.
Yeah.
And that has kind of collapsed a lot of like my anecdotal indicators. Plus, you and I work from home. There is no line office. Even if there was, we wouldn't be together because we're 2 time zones apart.
Yeah.
So my ability to just be out and about in public absorbing information has deteriorated in recent years. And I do try to offset that. I do try to go to events. I do try to talk to a variety of people. But polling fills a gap that I'm not having met observationally anymore. And I add on to that, I increasingly do not trust any social media platform because I don't know the algorithms under the hood.
Yep.
And we've talked about this before, even in a recent podcast. I was telling you about a woman I know who's otherwise a very, very smart woman, but who cannot train herself into realizing that her Twitter experience is not reflective of anything other than her optimized algorithm. So polling is one of the things I try to do. Like, I think to myself, I'm hearing a lot of this. I'm hearing a lot of that. I'm getting anecdotal signs that Poilievre's up or Carney's up or Trudeau's down or crime is a concern. Is anyone polling on this? Like, can I confirm my gut check? So that's why I think polling is more useful for you, or even maybe in my case, it's more necessary. But there is a couple of things with this particular election. And again, I'm not shitting on the pollsters. I think they would agree with me. First of all, I do agree with the polls. I do believe the polls. I'm not putting on those idiotic sweatshirts. But there are a few weird things with this election that are unusual that might scramble the polls.
Sure.
All polls are weighted. Right? There are formulas that we use to try and figure out, well, we just interviewed 1,500 Canadians. Here's the demographic breakdown. So we're going to take their preferences and we're going to multiply them using our own in-house proprietary formula to try and get an actual snapshot representative figure.
Each pollster has a slightly different way of going about that.
We have never really had a federal election, at least not within recent living memory, where the NDP bottom has fallen out like this. None of the models have experience trying to account for that.
Yeah, I
There
think
is,
that's true.
and I'm not expecting that to throw the, like, I'm not saying that we're going to have like wake up on Tuesday of next week and be like shocked by the outcome. But I think particularly to Jen, to your point of those really close ridings, we could have some surprises.
Oh, totally.
Because I don't think these models know how to account from an NDP that went from like 19% to some polls have had them at what, like 8?
Yeah, I mean, there's a non-zero chance that the NDP is going to get completely wiped out. Not lose party status at a minimum and maybe come away with no seats. That could happen.
I was talking to my polling nerds about that, and I'm hearing the NDP's worst case number is 6. So I don't know how well polling models are going to account for that. I also don't know, and I don't think we need to discuss this in length. I think we already have. If the Utes, that's a 1990s pop culture reference right there. If the Utes show up, there could be a plus side swing to the Conservatives here. But I want to be very clear. That's not a prediction. The Utes will usually disappoint you here. When I have heard Conservative friends of mine in recent days talk about the youth, their support with the youth.
Yeah, we've heard that before.
We've heard, yeah, oh my God.
We've heard that before.
Heard that before.
That ain't new.
And it's been, I haven't wanted to make fun because all these people are going through their own personal version of hell right now. But what the Conservatives sound like today is exactly what the Liberals sounded like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Like, anyone who ever finds themselves, and I respect Nick Nanos as a pollster, I do, but if you ever find yourself saying, but what about Nanos? You're losing. And 3 months ago, it was Liberals who were saying, yeah, but look at the latest Nanos. Look at the latest Nanos. I've got Conservatives telling me now, but look at the latest Nanos. Look at the latest Ecos. Main Street has us back on top. If I could take these guys to a time portal and have like them of today explain to them of January that their last remaining psychological line of defense was the Nanos Daily Tracker and the latest Ecos, they would think they had not just gone back in time, but they had crossed dimensions. They wouldn't believe it. So I will say this, though. You know what could happen?
Anything could happen.
The Greens could get completely wiped out.
Oh, well, that would be funny.
Like, this has been a terrible election, but my God, it would be nice to have one silver lining. Like, the country can go down in flames, but if the Greens go down first, I'm calling it a draw.
On that note, like and subscribe. I think we're going to wrap up with a little chat about the U.S., and then we're going to let you go along your way and encourage you to vote. Do vote. Vote early.
Not green.
Vote often. Just don't save the Greens. All right, like and subscribe, www.readtheline.ca.
This message is brought to you by Westinghouse. Canada's energy future is being shaped by the choices we make today. As demand for reliable, clean power grows, the need for proven solutions has never been more urgent. Nuclear energy is an essential part of the solution. Westinghouse's AP1000 reactor is the world's most advanced operational Generation 3 Plus reactor. Proven, safe, efficient, and ready now. It can be brought online within a decade, delivering clean, reliable power when we need it most. Building AP1000 plants can strengthen our electricity export capabilities and provide Canada's nuclear supply chain with access to 100% of the global market, all while minimizing the risks of building domestic nuclear energy generation on a single technology. Westinghouse is 100% Canadian owned and buys where it builds, working with over 450 Canadian suppliers to strengthen the domestic supply chain and bring benefits home to our nation. Canada needs energy. Westinghouse is ready. Learn more at westinghousenuclear.com/Canada.
So, Matt, there's just one thing I wanted to quickly clarify from the previous segment, something that I think some listeners might be a little bit confused about what I meant. When I said that this election is a generational turnover, I think a lot of people might confuse that thinking that I'm talking about the ages of the leaders or the ages of the MPs or the ages of the people in cabinet.
No, I understood. You meant where the median voter age.
Yeah, no, more than that, what I meant was what is the focus of the people in power? Who are they actually governing to and toward? That's kind of more what I meant. You can have, a leader who's in his 60s and be very focused on the future of Canada. So focused on trying to make sure that young people are staying in Canada or that the housing problem is being addressed. Or by comparison, you could have a leader in his 40s, but he knows that he manages to get elected by appealing to the boomer set. So in which case he's going to be focusing on things like protecting retirement and pensions or that kind of thing. Like when I say generational turnover, what I meant wasn't that Carney is older than Poilievre, although he is. What I meant was it was going to be a turnover of who the government was focused on and trying to govern to and for.
Yeah, no, first of all, yeah, okay. Clarification.
Just clearing that up for people.
I understood what you meant. And that is why, like, and I'm not, it's funny, you and I get a bad rap sometimes for targeting boomers. I actually think our sharpest criticisms are aimed at the young voters. These guys are suicidally absent. Like their sheer mass, if they made common cause with the lower end of Gen X and millennials, which is us, Jen and I, we don't look like what you think a millennial is, but just by birth cohort, Jen and I are both early millennials.
I'm not even that early.
That's true. Yeah. If the young voters just aligned with us on issues of mutual concern, we would outgun the boomers, but the boomers show up. And so, it's funny. I know we're going to move to talk about U.S. stuff now, but while we took just a quick break between recording those segments here, and I saw something funny while we were off. I dared peek at Twitter, which I'm encouraging you not to do. You know what's already starting to happen, and it's one of my favorite little features of Canadian politics because it's just such egregious bullshit. You know what? I'm gonna try and do a mental note. I'm too old to have mental notes that work, but I hope I remember to put this in the next bullshit bulletin. The final one, we'll run it next week just to run up the campaign. You know what is just abject, absolute, manifest bullshit?
Yeah, tell me.
The millions of Canadians who opine on social media, if only the Conservative Party was this, I would vote for it. No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't. And
no, you wouldn't.
I was looking at, and I'm not here to pick on anyone, but I've seen a couple of these tweets making the rounds over the last couple of days. And what invariably happens is that someone comes along and goes, I wish Canada had a more progressive Conservative Party. And if, someone who eschewed the rage farming of Pierre Poilievre and pursued more pragmatic policies like a Brian Mulroney or an Aaron O'Toole or a Jean Charest. And they go on and on and on. And then what happens without fails, people start asking them, did you vote for Brian Mulroney, Aaron O'Toole, or Jean Charest? And the answer is no. Because when given the choice between somewhat more liberal conservatives or liberals, the liberals vote for the liberals. And there's just this absolute fiction in this country that the conservatives will win over liberal voters. I do think conservatives need to have moderate policies that work for people in different regions of the country other than Alberta. I do think, like, if the Conservatives keep wondering why Atlantic Canadians aren't Albertans, they probably should figure that out some point. But just the idea that these very online, liberal voters who might once have dared voted NDP in their 20s or something, the idea that these are reachable voters for the Conservatives is just absolute bullshit.
But this is correct, but at the same time, that's the underlying logic that's kept the Conservatives from actually trying to increase their base, increase the tent, reach out to other types of media, reach out to try to influence people who are persuadable, right? That kind of logic is what's kept these people fundamentally insular and confined.
I think there are voters who could be persuaded to vote Conservative. I just don't think it's the ones who tweet about how they miss the conservatism of a guy they wouldn't have voted for anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. I agree with you on that. The only thing I would say is that I still think that we're going to come out of this election on the Conservative side having an interesting conversation about whether or not Aaron O'Toole would have done better. Now, I know Aaron O'Toole had issues internally with his caucus. Looks to me like Pierre Poilievre's also getting some issues internally with his caucus. What I
Can
think
I
that the
say a
Conservatives
thing?
made. Yeah, go
Can I
for
say
it.
a thing?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, conservative friends.
Hi, hi,
Um,
friends.
there is a faction of the conservative caucus today that has never felt comfortable with what they did to Aaron O'Toole. And it's been long enough now that I suspect most of the guilty consciences have been smothered. But there were people who did that only with reluctance on the promise that Poilievre would win. And then for the next 3 years, Poilievre looked like he was going to win. And that
This was the
probably,
argument that was winning. It was effective.
and if Poilievre does not win,
If Polyev does worse than Aaron O'Toole,
or even comparable, not only will there be the obvious political problems any leader would face in the aftermath of what will be deemed, fairly or not, as a blown election, there will be a constituency within the Conservative Party who will not only be angry, upset, and disappointed, but they will be guilty. And that is a powerful motivator. So anyway, we'll leave it there. I will simply end with once more with, hi, conservative friends.
hi, conservative friends.
You all know how to reach me if you want to start spilling your guts like you did last time. Because it's happening again.
You can also talk to me. I'm nice. I'm fun.
Yeah, Jen's great. You want to talk about the states? I mean, kind of like I said
Yeah,
it before
sure. We're
about
gonna
the
talk about the
election.
states.
No, but not like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we should talk a little bit. I mean, I was away for most of this week, Matt, because I did an interesting debate. UBC Okanagan had me out to argue whether or not America is our adversary or our ally, and I had the really rare opportunity of getting to play for the side that the room was play on the side of the room. Like I got all the best laugh lines and the best applause just because of what I was arguing. That's a really rare opportunity for me. It was really enjoyable. I feel like I got some karmic payback from all of my years on Twitter there. I don't think the UBC is going to publish the debate. That's their own call on whether or not they want to do it, but it was still kind of fun for me to participate in. But yeah, my big takeaway, and the more that I was building my case for this particular side, that America is our adversary, the more compelling I found the argument. But essentially, my case in all of this was, how should I say this? America is going in a very Viktor Orban's direction, very rapidly, right? We have the very rapid disintegration of democratic norms and the rule of law in order to move people into basically an El Salvadorian black site without due process. And a country that is abandoning due process for marginal individuals will inevitably abandon or restrict due process for less marginal individuals, with the hope that fear will basically...
It doesn't stop where it starts.
No, it doesn't stop where it starts.
Never
That's
has.
exactly correct. Never has. So right now, new norms are being established, and those norms are untenable. I think that's something that we need to be aware of. I think that's something that Canadian travelers to the United States need to be aware of.
Yeah, including me next week for a prearranged family event. So,
yeah. So things are getting dark very quickly. I think to the countervailing argument in all this, and the countervailing argument that came across during the debates from the ally side was essentially this is weird, but it's a blip, and the institutions are fighting back, and we will return to an equilibrium. We will return back to a norm. Maybe we will, but we don't know when.
You know,
we don't know how bad things are going to get.
I would say probably they will.
Probably.
But your two next points are the decisive ones. I don't know how bad it gets in the meantime and how long that takes.
Yeah, that's
I have a weird, stubborn streak of optimism for the American people. But I also know the American people well enough to know that every once in a while they go bonkers.
Yeah.
And it takes them some time to work through some things. So I don't mean to get all Keynesian here, like in the long run, we're all dead. America may well revert back to what we have identified as the normal America, the post-World War II America. It might not, But even if they do, if it takes 30 years, I'm fucked. Like in terms of like my useful lifespan, if it takes 30 years for America to get its shit together again, I'm in my 70s. So I better go find some good Mexican golf courses, I guess.
It's very interesting to talk to conservatives about this, because my sense of conservatives is that they believe that the risk that America is posing to Canada and the risk that it's posing to itself has been overblown and used as a wedge issue by the left in order to bring people back into the crowd, back into liberal politics or back into NDP politics kind of thing in BC in particular. And that's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's true that the left is using this as a wedge issue very effectively to push people back into their respective tents.
100%.
No question. No dispute. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that what's happening in the U.S. isn't a problem. It's a very significant problem. And one of the things
you just did there, Jen? You did a dangerous thing. You demonstrated nuance and independent thought.
Oh, God help me.
The internet is no place for that.
Well, one of the points that was made during the debate was one of the debaters for the ally side said, well, look, there are like 2,500 treaties between America and Canada. Like, we're so intertwined legally, politically, economically. Like, you kind of don't have a choice but to regard America as an ally, regardless of how crazy it is, was kind of the implication. And my point to that is, if America abandons the rule of law, those treaties ain't worth the paper they're printed on. You know, if you move into an arbitrary legal structure, it's what the president of the moment says it is. That's
or whatever a majority in Congress will agree it means.
Well, except that they have control over the majority of Congress, so it doesn't, it's irrelevant at that point. And also, by the way, the power that Congress is able to wield will eventually start to erode. So
it doesn't have to erode; they've given it up.
Well, same difference.
They handed it over.
They've handed it over. So, like, look, I mean, these are just sort of some of the ideas and the assumptions. I think one of the problems that we run into in Canada when we're trying to analyze the Canadian-U.S. alliance, and I see this on the left and the right, is normalcy bias, right? Normalcy bias is a hell of a drug. Well, things are a little weird now, but, like, they have to go back to normal, right? Or, like, I have to build my analysis of what's possible based on what I've experienced in my lifetime. And this is how the frog finds itself in a pot, acknowledging that the water's hot, but it's not going to boil. But it's not going to boil because I haven't seen a bubble yet, right?
This pot has never boiled before. It's getting hot, but this pot's never boiled. This ship can't sink.
No one can tell you what's going to happen with America right now. No one can tell you with any certainty. But that means that you have to operate under a situation that it's as bad as you could think it is and might be worse.
Perhaps I should have some expression I use often and use it as a headline of a column. Can I make a slightly different comment on the United States?
Sure. I mean, I know there was some specific news you wanted to talk about, but...
No, agree with everything you've said. But one of the things I just think is interesting is that I don't necessarily view the United States as likely becoming hostile. I think there are self-corrective mechanisms in the United States, or the other thing that you and I have talked about, and I think that's actually been on more self-evident display this week, has been exactly what you and I have been saying for months. I like it when we're validated. I dislike it when we're proven wrong. That's
not
annoying.
Fun. That makes me feel bad inside in my
don't like the feelings.
No,
I do like it when we're validated, though. And one of the things that you and I have been saying for months is that our best line of defense against Donald Trump is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And one of the really funny things that's been happening this week, and for the record here, I'm not rooting for China, not on China's side on this one, but the Chinese are playing the Americans like a fiddle. And the Americans came out with these massive tariffs. China retaliated. America ramped up the tariffs even more. And what China has very clearly decided is we can eat the pain longer than the Americans. They're just not going to take the White House's call. And the president every day this week has had some statement of, we're negotiating with China, we're going to get a deal. Other senior officials in the White House and the administration are saying the same. Oh, yeah, we're working with the Chinese, we're working with the Chinese. The Chinese keep coming out every day and going, we're not talking to you guys until you drop the tariffs. We'll talk to you after. Now, I'm sure I'm not taking China's word for it. Like, I would not be shocked if there are back channel communications going on. But what the Chinese are doing is they're taking the stock market. Like, that's what every time they come out and they go, we're not negotiating with you guys, the markets go bonkers. And the Chinese have a better sense of where America's pain points are than I think the White House did. And one of the really interesting things, this is kind of a grim joke. Forgive me every once in a while for going here. Listeners, viewers, you know I love you. Years ago, one of my journalism colleagues, I don't remember who it was now, I can't credit the joke properly. He said, it was during the pandemic, he said, years from now, when this is all over, we're going to be continually surprised by seeing epidemiological tweets. Because we've all followed all these like infectious disease experts, and they're tweeting up a storm right now, and we're dependent on them. 3-4 years from now, we're going to forget about this. And every once in a while, your Twitter feed will just suddenly light up with like a tweet about some germ. And you're going to be like, why am I following this guy? Oh, right. It was from the pandemic. I followed a bunch of supply chain experts during the pandemic. You want to know whose Twitter accounts are becoming awfully fucking active right now?
Yep.
The supply chain and logistics guys.
Yep.
Because stuff that should have left China 2 weeks ago didn't. Because it was no longer affordable. So this means ships
You're saying I picked a really good moment to get my designer knockoff scarves sent over.
I bought a car. And when I went in and bought the car, I had a real easy time haggling that price down. And when we finally actually put pen to paper, I asked the guy, you let me walk all over you. Why? And he goes, because we got to get these things off the lot. Because we don't know what's coming. And I'm just absolutely fascinated by this. The rule of law stuff is interesting. So one of the stories that is broken today, and Jen and I have not had the opportunity to look into it closely yet because it's developing when we were recording this. But the FBI has arrested a judge, or federal agents have arrested a judge for obstructing justice. Jen and I have talked about elitism and credentialism and all these things. I don't put judges on any kind of pedestal. Judges will have the usual standard distribution of morons and assholes as any other group in humanity. There are judges that get busted for DUI or spousal abuse or substance abuse issues, blah, blah, blah. They're not heroes to me. But when federal agents are arresting judges for obstruction of justice because of judges issuing orders that they deemed within the rule of law, America's got a problem.
Yeah, that's a rapid acceleration.
We're not, like, again, if cops arrest the local judge because he's swerving all over the freeway, that is the rule of law.
That is the rule of law.
When we have the federal government arresting local judges for obstruction of justice, that's constitutional crises. And
just want to go back to the trade argument, because I mean, I know there are still people out there who are under the assumption that Donald Trump is playing 5D chess and this is all going to work out great for America. You wait and see. I mean, maybe it does work out great for America, but I don't think that that's proof that Donald Trump is playing 5D chess. I mean, one of the things that I tried to point out during this debate was bad faith changes everything. Bad faith changes incentives. If we could have faith that America were operating in good faith with us, then our incentives are to address the problems that they've identified. Our incentives are to address the defense spending delinquencies. Our incentives are to talk about supply management. Our incentives are to find compromises and better deals that everyone can live with if they're operating in good faith. The problem is that America is not operating in good faith. And even if we did everything they wanted, what's going to happen the next day? They're going to come up with another list of grievances, right? So in a bad faith environment, the game theory suggests that actually, no, we don't have an incentive to negotiate or come up with a good deal or cut a deal at all. Our incentive, in fact, is the opposite of that. Our incentive is to rag the puck on their grievance. So if their grievance, for example, is supply management, our incentive in a bad faith scenario is to rag the puck on supply management and to basically die on our hill of bad dairy.
You're sports balling.
The reason why we did sports balling.
You used a hockey metaphor correctly.
You're so
you did it.
Thank you.
This is great.
But the reason why that is our incentive is because that's the only way we can actually control the conflict space with our much larger trade partner. So, okay, they're going to be angry at us on supply management. They'll punish us. They'll take out their blah, 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 blah. But at least when we're stalling on that issue, we know they can't move on to another issue. Like, you know what I mean? Like, every day that we can get them to fixate on this issue is a win for us, right? We're stalling, we're buying time. That's why the tactics that Trump is engaging in right here, I don't think it's 5D chess, because he's created an environment of bad faith. And in an environment of bad faith, no one has an incentive to play nicely with America. Nobody has an incentive to cut a deal. Everyone has unique incentives to try and stall them out. And I think that that's a really important distinction here. And it's something that we need to understand going into whatever we're going into with America. One, if America's given up on rule of law, then whatever trade deals or legal frameworks they want to throw at us doesn't mean shit. It's not trustworthy because it can be unilaterally altered and has been unilaterally altered. And then two, if you want to see an example of the bad faith problem in action, I would turn your attention back to what happened during January when the U.S. was talking about fentanyl and illegal border crossings. Basically, Trump said jump, and we said how high. We allotted $1.3 billion to fixing our border border controls. And we talked about, creating a fentanyl czar. And basically, we gave them everything. We gave them all the concessions they wanted on that issue. And what happened? What happened was that Trump declared victory. It was maybe 2-day news story. He got to play the victory lap at our expense, and then 3 days later, he's back on tariffs. Right?
Yeah.
Then 6 weeks later, he imposes the tariffs on the auto sector. So, none of that spending, none of the borders are the $1.3 billion in border spending, none of that bought us anything with Trump. Didn't buy a shit. So he's demonstrating that he's a bad faith actor, and he's demonstrating that any concessions we give him is good money after bad.
Remember all those idiots who 6 weeks ago were like, hey, Gurney and Gerson, why don't you two guys just fix the border? Well, fuck you. That's why.
Because it didn't. Firstly, arguably, we can always fix the border and make it a little bit better. We can always make those improvements. But that wasn't the issue.
Of course
and we knew it.
And we knew it.
Now, and I don't necessarily mind the fact that we put that money toward those border measures in order to try to win some goodwill and try and rebuild the good faith back. Mm-hmm. It wasn't bad for us to do that. But now that the Trump administration has demonstrated that they don't actually give a fuck what we do, they've signaled their intention really clearly. And I think that countries like Japan, like China, like Canada, like all these other countries, we've picked up the signal. And the signal is that these guys aren't operating in good faith. So we have to change our strategy and we have to change our game theory, right? And if that means we have to deal with more supply managed butter, that's just the necessity. And I'm telling you, this is someone who really hates the supply managed dairy system.
Terrible. I was at a nice restaurant a few days ago that somehow actually had decent European butter, and my God.
Oh my God, I'm so jealous.
So you and I, well, you get the blame for this one. You invented a really inelegant term for this strategy maybe a month or two ago. Fuck weasels. Mm. Trump is getting fuck weaseled by the entire world.
Yes, by the entire world.
And yeah, and you're right. Rational game theory is that every American action will result in some proportionate reaction from other countries, and America, due to its military and economic and political power, can dictate the terms of those engagements. They can't do it with 200 countries at once. And it was funny because I was talking with you in the first segment about how for the last 5 years, I have been waiting to see a Canadian immune system response to all of this, and I haven't. But what we're seeing is a global immune system response, of which Canada is one particular white blood cell, where in response to all the stuff that the United States is doing, the world, with no particular coordination, everybody simply moving in their own rational self-interest, is fuckweaseling the Americans. And China, I mean, here, it's really an elegant term here, but China is kind of like the apex fuckweasel here. And they are fuckweaseling the U.S. And just, it's been fascinating to see Donald Trump trying to art of the deal himself out of the problem he caused. This is...
It's almost like he's not.
The bluff?
It's almost like Donald Trump's not a very good businessman, Matt.
You want to know something?
Well, first of all, just to that point, one of the reasons why America is playing the way it is because they've radically overestimated their economic and military importance. I'm not saying that they're not big. They absolutely are big. They're economically big. They're militarily beyond big. Nobody actually questions that. But economically speaking, at least, they're not bigger than the rest of us combined. They're not even close to bigger than the rest of us combined. So one of the major strategic errors that the Trump administration is making here is in overestimating their economic power relative to literally everyone else. They can pick a fight with Canada. They could even pick a fight with China. They could pick a fight with the EU. They could pick a fight with lots of people because they're so big. But they can't pick with everyone all at once. And like their failure to grok that is indicative of people who are highly parochial and very poorly informed about the rest of the world, which is, I'm sorry to say, true of most Americans. But it's going to get them absolutely bulldozered. The problem is that we're so integrated with them that if they bulldozer themselves, they're going to bulldozer us with them.
We'll get fuck-weaseled with them, yeah.
We'll get fuck-weaseled with them.
The problem, though, that I see, and you've touched on this, and this is just floating a thought here, okay?
Float the thought.
Putting this out there into the void. We'll see what the universe sends back to me, okay?
Okay.
I do think there are self-corrective mechanisms in America. I think Americans will eventually get themselves out of this mess. I don't know how long it's going to take. Could take to the midterms. Could take 2 generations. I don't know. In the meantime, though, one of the things that worries me is that I am learning Spanish. And I've told the listeners this before. I'm getting actually reasonably good at it. Not great, but I could go to Spain or Mexico and I could go around and eat lunch and stuff. One of the things I'm doing is I'm reading Mexican newspapers. It's kind of just one of my way of practicing. I am currently unusually well versed in Mexican news. And some Colombian news, some Panamanian news, some Spain news, right? Trying to just keep exposing myself to new words and stuff. One of the things I've picked up on from the Mexican news is that the Americans are dealing with the Mexicans very differently than they're dealing with us, Canada. And they're dealing with the Europeans differently than they're dealing with us. And I'm worried about that because you're right. First, the Americans were talking to us about fentanyl, and then they were talking to us about the border. So we leased 2 Black Hawks. We appointed a border czar. We gave Trump a couple of wins. The Americans haven't asked anything else from us. We're still getting hit. You know, the Mexicans get hit, and the Americans have a series of demands. And then the Mexican government plays hardball on some. They play good cop on others. They cut a deal here. They resist here. The Mexicans are shrewd. They're really dealing with the Americans well.
They're actually outplaying us on the Americans.
Well, I think at first they were, but right now there's no ball in play for us. So we're getting hit by tariffs, right? We're like, you know, Trump just a few days ago said that he wanted to raise the auto tariffs even more. We have not been given any sense of what it would take to get rid of these. Yeah, there were original demands. I think the tariffs are simply to impoverish us because then we'll be cheaper to pick up at a discount later. Trump has demands for China, Mexico, Europe, Japan. What are his demands for us?
Well, look, I mean, my concern here is that right now we're all looking like, oh, America's attention is elsewhere. Great, everything's fine. And or Mark Carney's dealt with it. Perfect. I think there's a good chance that that Trump specifically has left us alone in the midst of this election, maybe in part because he wants Carney, maybe because he doesn't want to interfere during the election for whatever reason, or he's just sort of seeing how the situation plays out. Who knows? But if that theory is correct, what we would expect to see would be America ramping up its economic terrorism against us, basically on April 30th.
Yeah.
Sometime between April 30th and May 2nd would be when we would expect after the election, right? After somebody's elected and we've all moved on. If your theory is correct, we should expect to see a significant economic barrage hit us in very short order. We'll see.
I'd feel better if we had demands and then we could decide to play ball, ignore them or not. But
I think at this point you have to operate under the assumption that Trump's own statements in terms of his are not trolls. He actually believes that he wants to pursue the idea of Canada as a 51st state or parts of Canada as a 51st state. I think you have to take that at face value.
Which parts?
Well, I think you have to take that at face value. Now, that doesn't mean we know how much he's willing to sacrifice in order to make that happen. I don't think that he's going to risk actually amassing a military presence at the border. I just don't think that's plausible. To what extent is he willing to risk domestic economic upheaval in order to make that happen? I don't know. I don't think that is knowable. And also, to what extent could he potentially be distracted by the multiple wars that he's picked up across the globe?
By China refusing to pick up the phone.
Well, precisely. I mean, yes, that is also a possibility. Is it possible that Congress will start to get its groove back? Yes, possibility.
Sure,
there are just too many balls in the air right now for us to understand where that threat is going to go. And we can't know what Trump is willing to sacrifice in order to pursue that goal. That said, I don't think the goal's a troll. I think that I'm taking him at his value when he says, I take him at his word when he says that that's what he would like to achieve.
Our best defense will be America becoming dysfunctional before it can hurt us. And it might.
Yep, that's possible.
Really looking forward to my trip to Michigan.
It'll be great. You're going to have so much fun. Tell me how the border goes.
I've never been to El Salvador.
Yeah.
Okay, I got nothing else to add.
Really love being public journalists who have said mean things about Donald Trump while crossing the border now. That's awesome for us. Love that.
Really enjoying it. All right, well, I'll tweet once I'm back in Canada, and if I don't, I'd like you all to sign the petition for my release. You know what? Honestly, though, to our friends in America, and we have many, I look at where the listeners and the readers are. There's tons of people reading us in the States, and I assume a lot of them are expats, but some of them, we hear from them. Americans are great at reaching out and just saying, hey, I'm an American, but I really love your take on things, and great to hear from you. Americans are more outgoing that way. Guys, if you could get your shit together sometime in the near future, speaking just on behalf of myself and 41 million of my buddies, we would be grateful.
Be awesome. Be great. Can we be friends again? That would be lovely.
See you in Michigan.
Bye.
Like and subscribe.